At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Ranked #1 in innovation for 10 consecutive years and #2 among public universities for employability, ASU isn't just ahead of the curve, it's creating new paths to success. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online, that's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Hi, friends. We're going to do a deep dive on Flowpresso today. If you listen to this channel or you follow me on social media, you'll see that Flowpresso is where I spend a majority of my time, and I am part of the Flowpresso family. My actual title is Head of Innovation, but I don't really know what that means. What I can tell you is I love the technology, and it is one of the most transformational experiences I've ever had with any health tech in my life. And I'm biased, and that is often confirmed after I put people in this suit, which has pneumatic pressure and deep pressure therapy and thermotherapy. It is wild. It's like the best warm hug you've ever had. And today, I get to sit down with a founder, the creator, and my close personal friend, Desiree De Spong, who really is family. And we just talk about all the things that Flowpresso solves for, from environmental toxicants to fluid balance, to weight loss, to metabolic function, to accelerated wound care. And we start to understand why the lymphatic system holds so much magic and potential, and it is often overlooked. So grab your favorite beverage. Maybe that's some Beam Minerals. Grab a warm cup of coffee and just curl up by this fireside chat because it's a lovely conversation. Let's jump on in. Welcome to the Beautifully Broken podcast. I'm your host, Freddie Kimmel, and on this show we explore the survivor's journey, practitioners making a difference, and the therapeutic treatments and transformational technology that allow the body to heal itself. Witness the inspiration we gain by navigating the human experience with grace, humility, and a healthy dose of mistakes. Because part of being human is being beautifully broken. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Beautifully Broken podcast. I'm here with our lovely guest, Desiree De Spong. How you doing?
Good, thank you.
Yeah. Are you excited to be in America again?
Yeah, I've had a great couple of weeks already, a couple of conferences and hung out with awesome people in Austin. What could you want more?
What could you want? So our episode was 183.
Wow. And how many have you done since?
I think this week, whenever this one comes out, I want to say we're like 236.
Wow.
I know. Yeah, it flies by. It's wild.
Yeah.
It's wild. And I know that because I've shared it so many times. It's one of my most shared episodes because I am very much immersed in the world of Flowpresso these days. And I thought it would be nice for us to revisit because I've learned so much and I've met so many people and met so many clinics that use the system now. I'd love to start out with just a recap. And if you could tell us why you decided to bring Flowpresso from an idea into a physical device.
Sure. So there was a number of reasons. Who inspired me was a doctor called Dr. Drobot, who is in the American Center for Biological Medicine. I was teaching in the US, and he came up to me one day and said, "Can't you just make something for us?" Because I think it's quite a reality, and this is worldwide, that there is a real shortage of lymphatic drainage therapists, as in experts in the field. A lot of people get like a weekend workshop, but I'm talking those that have done intensive training. So, it's not easy to have one, or the ones that are available are usually so booked up that people can't have access to. So I think his focus was more that something he could have in clinic that he could rely on was there all the time, and then it would be able to support their biological medicine approach. So that's probably, what inspired. But if I step back a bit, my 20 years of working in the lymphatics, it's been a lot to do with cancer. And, you start to see the magic draining lymphatics does on their recovery or on their journey. And, it even I saw it over time lengthened the time that they were to be here if it was stage 4, for example. Like it gave them more quality, for want of a better word. And I just saw that was something, it was a game changer. But one of the things that I did recognize was that when we do lymphatic drainage, how they go into this deep parasympathetic state. And we all know that's the magical place to heal. So those were the kind of reasons that forced me, which, it was a kind of force because I had no idea how to do med tech. It's kind of funny when you think about it. But I just spent the time a little bit like a mad scientist in a basement, working out what was there, what wasn't. It was incredibly important for me, having been in the industry for so long, that the sequential aspect of it was mimicking what the lymphatics does. And I think, we've been overwhelmed, well, I have been, by the amount of experts in the field saying this is the closest they've ever seen to what they think it would be like. And I mean, that's very humbling to hear that. I mean, we were only there on the weekend, right? And we had people saying we've done every sort of compression that there exists, and this is the best, the game changer, because it really is trying to support lymphatic function and work with the body in the way it pumps, but also I think being that heat wrapped and held and being able to go into that having that somatic experience and going into that deep parasympathetic is just what's really made the whole technology profound. And, I'm incredibly proud to be the guardian of this product. I do feel that, when you think otherwise, it loses its special aspect of it. So I always just consider myself a guardian, as you are, in your delivery of selling it. And we all play a role in making a difference for others to feel better.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm hearing you say that it's a technology that it solves the lack of equality across different therapists. Like there's a standardization, and
Yes.
which is an area where there's scarcity for manual drainage therapists. And then there's wildly different, as I've learned, techniques and trainings. One of the ones that gets thrown out a lot is we'll never do lymphatic drainage if you have cancer because you'll spread your cancer around. So I'd love to just answer that one first as I bookmark, and then we'll go back into this, what Flowpresso solves.
So that's something I was taught too. And it was a very old reference in a medical journal. But subsequently, since, there's been so much research to show otherwise. And I've sat in lymphology conferences with some of the top lymphologists in the world, including people like Stanley Roxon here in the US. And it's a question every lymphatic therapist still asks today to be assured, does it spread cancer? And they say no, because we all, as you know, have cancer cells. So just the fact that I move my arm is moving cancer cells.
Yeah, let's spread our cancer around.
Let's just, this is what happens. And so now if someone was doing a deep tissue therapy on a tumor site or on a lymphoma area or something like that, yes, absolutely, something could adverse happen. But when you're dealing with lymphatic drainage, it's more of a hug, a hold, it's a soft butterfly technique if you're using your hands. So we're not doing much more than what the body is already doing. I mean, we're probably doing less than a workout, in the gym, getting in amongst, weights and stuff.
Yeah.
So I do struggle with why it's even still in the ether of discussion, because it doesn't make any sense, nor have I seen any substantial research to show otherwise.
Yeah. In my embodied education of lymphatics, having my cancer spread to my lymphatic system, I'd said the only time it was ever mentioned to me was, oh, how unfortunate your cancer went there. Nobody had the conversation, well, Freddie, within those lymph nodes is all your NK killer cells we want them to rove around the body. We want them to proliferate tissue. We want flow within that lymphatic system. And we certainly don't want it burdened up with environmental toxicants and heavy metals and cellular waste. So it's a really interesting thread that doesn't seem to die.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a fear. It's the fear of the unknown. And we do know, as you said, our cancer cells go into the lymph nodes. But isn't that what their role is? They're a hub, like you say, of activity. They've got the NK cells, which are your natural killer cells, which are so important for dealing with cancer. But, you've got your T cells, your B cells, dendritic, you've got all this different activity. It's like a power of immunity there. So my thing's always been, wow, maybe it's containing it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not
Yeah.
spreading through the bloodstream. So, my thing for me is in my training, and I always go back to my training, is that, it doesn't make any sense why it would be considered spreading cancer, because when you're doing lymphatic drainage, that means their massage would spread cancer. So why do we not stop massage happening? In New Zealand, part of recovery especially in our breast cancer support services, they offer an oncology massage, which incorporates lymphatic or lymphedema therapy. So, for me, it's like the touch alone is more powerful, and when you're dealing with massage, you're in deeper than what you are with lymphatics. So I cannot logically get my head around where the concern comes from. And all I can do is say that maybe it was part of a training or part of something that went back many years ago that's never been updated to date.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of dogma within the allopathic model, which has been around for a long time. And we could do a whole podcast on that. But, I always tell people, look, if you want to really look at a shocking data point, 20 to 60% of breast tissue biopsies seed cancer cells into the peripheral tissues. And that's documented in PubMed and NIH. But we do that. We're talking about a very, very gentle therapy that, especially with Flowpresso, it's like a warm hug. So I've never understood it. I want to go back to that little bookmark. And so it's standardizing the therapy. But then we're also adding in something that, from my understanding, a manual drainage therapist cannot do. And that is to move up the left and right sides of the body with bilateral pressure. And the first time I said it to somebody, they're like, well, what's happening? Well, what's really happening? What is happening? And I was like, oh my God, what's really happening? When there's no toothpaste left in the tube and you got to get both sides and you roll from the bottom. And so I'd love if you could talk a little bit about how the suit mechanically is different than manual drainage therapists would work, because they'd work proximal to distal, whereas the suit is coming from the bottom of the feet. And it's this pressurized system, which is under like this, again, a tube of toothpaste is under the principle, it functions under the principle of fluid dynamics, right? We push from the bottom and roll the fluid to the top, and then we've got this drain up here. So how is this different in a mechanical process than a manual drainage therapist would work on the body?
Yeah, so bringing back to what you said, so, practitioners do proximal to distal, and there's a reason for that. We're literally, when it comes to lymphatics, there's no pump, and we're literally pushing fluid uphill. So it really is not easy to open up and create. So, if I was doing manual drainage on you, I would not go down and start at your feet. I would always start up at the terminus here, because I want to open up pathways to create the sites to be available so I can move the fluid, because I'm using a very delicate, gentle, rhythmic therapy. I'm not pushing like a tube of poo, because, when you're toothpaste, using your analogy, you kind of roll it out like you're using force. So you're using the momentum to be able to get the fluid through. And so from a lymphatic point of view, if we're doing manual drainage, we are doing it this particular way because we have to open up what I call all the dams, so all the sites of the lymph nodes, the areas where the fluid is going to go, so that we can actually achieve drainage. Now, with the suit, if we understand the mechanical aspect of how the lymphatic capillaries work, is they are literally pushing fluid uphill. They're going up through what they call mitral valves. So you've got your lymphatic capillaries, and there's these valves like a dam that are opening and closing and surging up the body. So I actually did try to do it proximal to distal. It felt awful. There was no rhythm to it. It didn't feel comfortable at all. And I never saw any difference, right? Like I didn't see anything from a measurable point of view that could actually show me that it was better. So I went back to what every other pneumatic compression pump does in the world, even if you're in hospital, and they go upwards. And so I went back to that process of doing that, but being very mindful that when you're dealing with compression, there's an overlap. And you do see in other compression devices, especially the cheaper versions, they'll have you'll see the cut sitting in between when the compression's inflated. And that's dangerous because that means there's a gap between the initial compression and the second. So imagine if I had my two hands and there's a gap in between. So that fluid is going to sit and pool in that area if it's not dealt with correctly.
You can see it on like a cheaper suit or a lot of the compression gear. There is like a stitched seam in the canvas
Correct.
that goes around. And so that's like bladder 1,
Yes.
bladder 2, bladder 3. So if we think about this idea of the overlap, which does exist in a Flowpresso system, that's the big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when the bladder is compressing into the person's body, we have got it so that it literally has, like, you probably can't see this if you're I'm not watching this on a video, but what I'm doing is I'm placing my lower finger over top of my upper finger, and I'm actually showing that there's an overlap. So the idea is that they overlap the whole time to create a push through. So it's actually making the momentum and working through those lymphatic capillaries to be able to build fluid upwards and move it out. And fluid from a lymphatic point of view, we're always trying to drain back up towards the heart or to the termini or terminus, which is above your collarbone, so that you can actually maintain that momentum. That's when you're going to meet it with the blood, goes through the heart, into the liver, and then we obviously have our different ways of eliminating, which is bowel, urine, breath, or sweat.
Yeah. So explain that to just people who might hear this and they don't understand about the lymph. You keep saying terminus, or why do we want to push up to here?
So we call it like the terminal point. Where does it meet? So it's just above your collarbone. So, just near the shoulder area. And there's a collective group of lymph nodes there, but it's also where our left subclavian and right subclavian veins are meeting with the lymph. So they're joining in, especially the thoracic duct. So think of a tube from about your belly button that runs up through to your left subclavian, which is on your left side, that's meeting to the heart. That's actually taking not only lymphatic fluid from pretty much the waist down, but it's also responsible for the fats and proteins that are in the small intestine. So it's all about surging these fluids, both tissue fluid, but also these fats and proteins up to meet back to the heart. And that's why we do require momentum. And the nice thing is, as with massage, you're lying down. So you're allowing to work. So there's a lot now of everyone standing up and doing their lymphatic drainage, right? And it's great because you're doing lymphatic drainage. I really applaud everyone. I've never seen so much Instagram posts on lymphatic drainage in my 20 years as what I've seen in the last 3 years. So I'm like, yay. Finally, we're getting it out there that it's so important. But do remember, if you're standing up, you're trying to push fluid uphill.
Yeah.
So lying down and doing it can be a lot more profound, especially if you're trying to make a difference in your legs.
Yeah.
And so that's where I go back to our manual drainage process is to be considered when you're not using something mechanical or has the ability like Flowpresso to actually push and create momentum and work with the way the lymphatics actually functions and take the fluid back to the heart.
Yeah. That's a great point. And then the other piece of technology that comes into Flowpresso that would be different from a human being is this range of heat. So we've got this 86, now it's 86 degrees to 104
Correct.
degrees Fahrenheit. And so why heat? Why is it important in the technology, and what does that serve, or what does it add to the value proposition?
So within my clinic, I was observing things like, for example, lymphedema. The tissue changes. It becomes fibrotic, becomes clammy and cold. It's like, think of a pipeline that's got stuck and it's not moving anything. And it's just, It becomes congealed, congested. And in lymphology, we would never encourage anyone with lymphedema to go into a sauna or a spa or anything. So heat was always kind of an adverse consideration. And I would still recommend that you do not do that. But what I found was I started testing things like with hot stones. And I'd be putting warmth into the arm or into the leg, and I'd watch the tissue start to change. And you'd put it under their kidneys, right, during the session through their abdominal work, and you'd just watch them completely soften and let go. And of course, when you're nourishing the warmth of the kidneys, if we're talking from an Eastern philosophy, it's actually helping the fluids move.
Mm.
So not only, yes, from a urination point of view, but also to able to start stabilizing kidneys balance fluid. So I started to really test the theory with heat. And then I kind of came to the realization, well, hang on, we're so quick to divide all our systems off. You know, we've got the cardiologist for the heart, you know, we've got the urologist for the bladder and all those sorts of things. But I was more going, well, hang on, it's part of a circulatory system. So why aren't we thinking about vascular? Because at the end of the day, half the problem that the lymphatics has is that the blood capillaries are leaking plasma protein into the tissue. And then it's the lymphatics job, and only the lymphatics job, to be able to return those proteins back to the blood. And this is what keeps fluid moving. So you sort of go, well, these two are working together on some level. We've got to actually work them well. So heat became for me about dilation, warmth, dilation, get the blood flowing, get the nutrients, get the oxygen into that tissue, but then put the compression in so we could get the byproduct and the tissue waste and everything out of that area that no longer serves us.
Yeah.
So it was to create this unity of the two working together. But I think then going through the results and what we were doing in our early trials, I realized, wow, we're actually delivering deep pressure therapy. Because when you're held and you're warm, you let go. You know, your body is going into a completely different phase of, I feel like wrapped up, loved and hugged. And that's where we got the analogy from, was the amount of people in my research phase of trialing the prototype was, I feel like I'm hugged all over. And that was from first responders through to cancer patients.
Yeah.
And so it brings a completely different aspect. And I think one of the analogies I've learned to say lately is, you know, people make bone broth. You know, and when you let the bone broth cool, you've got all that congealed fat sort of stuff sitting on top. Well, that can be what the environment in your tissue can look like, especially when it's compromised from the lymphatics. And I always go think of cellulite or those sorts of things. But what does it do when it heats up? Thins out.
Yeah.
It's a completely different product to drink and eat than if you were having it straight from the pot when it was cold. So that's sort of a good analogy to explain how heat plays such a different role in using it within Flowpresso.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So obviously you've had manual drainage therapists come into the Flowpresso universe and switch over and start using this. Like, what's been their experience if they could compare like what they could do with their hands versus what they could do with their suit?
I think it's more the time efficiency, the less demand on the body. They're still getting results, but I do want to say we're a manual drainage therapist, especially an expert in an area where we're dealing anything with post-mastectomy or major health issues, is that what they still need to work those very specific sites, because our Flowpresso is not designed for that. It's designed for, 6 weeks after surgery, the recovery aspect. You're into a phase where you can support that person without what I call pooling fluid in areas because it's still compromised due to maybe lymph node removal or trauma from surgery, etc. So they play still a very important role. And obviously, you're opening up, a lot of practitioners will still open up certain areas based on what you're dealing with. So if I've got swelling in my legs, for example, practitioner may open up my inguinal or iliac nodes to be able to help that fluid more efficiently and then put me in the suit. That's those that are really qualified will consider that. But I think more importantly, it's given them an opportunity to step back a little and not have to work as hard. They can take on more clientele. The great thing is it's a click and put and forget type scenario and most people want to be left alone. They want to be left in the suit. They're fully clothed. They want to live in this little bubble for their 40-minute session. They don't need anyone fussing over them or worrying about them. You have this beautiful music in the background. You have an eye mask. And so you're given this opportunity just to forget.
Yeah.
And that is magical. And so the great thing is the practitioner is giving you a buzzer so you can contact them at any point and they're able to go and do something else, even if it is a small session with someone or catching up on their book work or just having 5 minutes out to rest. That's where the huge benefit is.
Yeah. And what about the other thing that people often ask is, We've got so many lymph nodes in the face, head, and neck. I think you often say between 600 and 1,000, depending on what medical textbook you pick up, but over 300 in the face, head, and neck. So could you talk a little bit about the FlowVibe and how that's a tool to actually give the full body experience?
Yeah, so obviously it is an area we can't cover in compression. I'm sure that's obvious. You don't want to be compressed around your throat. So
it'd be hard to design a suit for all the different faces and necks in the world.
Oh, yeah. I did look. It is quite a challenge doing a headpiece and a lot of compliance around that because of the potential of what it could do. So the easiest solution was to create FlowVibrate. And again, using vibration. I mean, we don't think twice of getting on a vibration plate, for lymphatics, but a very soft version. And then the idea for that was if you weren't a trained manual lymphatic drainage therapist and you didn't know how to do it effectively, you could actually do the drainage with the FlowVibrate. So we can have one in each hand and we're just opening up through to the cervical or the cervical nodes, they call them in New Zealand. And then you've got some key lymph nodes that we open up behind the ears, front of the ears, under the jaw, and then we're able to drain the face and head. Now, where the benefit of that is everything from brain fog, sinus issues, also things like, we now know we've got a lymphatics of the brain. We now know our brain actually needs to drain. So some of it, not all of it, goes through the cervical nodes. So again, we're trying to create this clearing. And for the women out there that wake up in the morning like I do, being my age, is you've got a bit of puff and you want to clear the puff under your eyes and under your face, it's fantastic for that, for self-care. And that's where the advantage came in, is not only could we use it for clinical care, but we could send it home and allow someone to not be overwhelmed by how do I drain it manually? Like, which way do I put my hands? How do I send it this way? Because it's got a little bit too complicated for some people. And this was just an easier solution to be able to sit in front of TV, or in your case, in your car, on your way to everywhere you go.
Everywhere I go. Yeah, it's really wild that, I never, that was definitely one health hack I didn't see coming. Will I be driving in my Jeep with a vibrator? But I will tell you, I can tell, especially like 3 days in, if I do it, morning and I do it before I go to bed, it's such a difference. And there is a buildup, there is a buildup when we don't do these things. And I kind of had this moment this morning, again, it's sort of like dental care. It's like, so you want me to brush my teeth? Well, what should I expect as far as health benefits? Am I going to feel, are my biceps going to work better? And it's like, well, no, but in 15 years, when that bacteria starts to overwhelm your gums, and then eventually your heart, you'll have heart disease.
Yeah.
And so I think about it like the same way. I was like, I really think it's not something that you do not need sickness to be the forcing function for you to think about some of these regulatory systems, which has been a big theme. Whether that's muscles or it's lymphatic or it's drainage pathways or it's respiratory function, whether it's learning how to breathe, these kind of core essentials that would be in like a human health blueprint that are they're essentials.
Friends, I know we can all agree that modern life takes a toll, from stress, poor soil quality, processed food, and way too much caffeine for most of us. It drains the minerals from the body that we desperately need to function. We weren't built for this environment, but there's a way to bring the body back to balance. B Minerals taps into nature's original blueprint, using humic and fulvic compounds, ancient plant-based molecules that deliver minerals directly to your cells. Not only do they deeply hydrate, they also bind and help remove junk your body doesn't need, supporting detoxification. It's really not a supplement. It's more of a cellular restoration product. It's a food. There's no sugar, no additives, no filler, just clean ionic minerals your body remembers. You can use code BEAUTIFULLYBROKEN and reconnect to the way your body was designed to thrive. Ancient wisdom, modern health, B Minerals. Let's get back to the show.
The next question I really want to ask you is, why do I need a Flowpresso? Like, why do I need to do lymphatic drainage? It doesn't seem like my ancestors 300,000 years ago were sitting around under a big oak tree, opening up pathways. Why today?
There's a few different reasons. We're more sedentary. So we sit at an office desk A lot of people do every day. And just sitting alone creates what I call pooling in the pelvic area. So maybe this is some of the reasons why we've seen such an increase, in PCOS and, even maybe the issues that we're seeing with IVF kind of things and even men with erectile dysfunction and stuff, because we sit all day, we're not moving enough. That's the first problem. Second one is, I think, environmentally, like we're more and more exposed from the air we breathe to the Wi-Fi, everything's frequency. So, I don't get on a whole lot of like discussion around this stuff because there's a lot of different opinions, but everything is frequency and it has to sort of rattle us a little bit, especially when you're working in buildings. There's all this unnatural light we sit under. We're not outside in the sun enough. We're not walking with bare feet. We're not grounded enough. And so, our accumulation of byproduct in the body, and we haven't even started on diet here, is accumulating. And I think there's more junk going in than what we're getting out. And I do feel like, for example, me coming from New Zealand, very lucky in New Zealand where, every bit of beef is grass-fed. We do have a cleaner air. I'm not saying we're perfect by any means. It's just interesting when I come here, my skin changes. I feel a little bit like I turn into a prune. It sort of dries out really fast. I notice more sinus issues. My eyes water more. Excuse me telling everyone this, but your body odor changes. I mean, when I go back to New Zealand, I feel like I have to detox for a month. It's the bizarrest thing. So you're exposed a lot more than we are, but I still see it a worldwide problem. And people understanding that, we've always done detox. I mean, detox has been around for years and it's great. But if the drainage pathways aren't working, because when you look at any MAP process, it all starts at cellular level. Then the next thing's the lymphatics. Then we talk about the organs and then the elimination processes, but we've got to get the pathways open to move the fluid out. And, just think of that fish in a bowl. Like if the fish is your cell and the bowl's the water it's laying in and we feed it, and over time we're not taking the byproduct of that fish away and we don't have a filter to filtrate it, we know the fish is going to die, right?
Yeah.
And it's the same with our fluids. We're being overwhelmed. And that's why daily practice, it doesn't have to be an hour every day. I mean, that's why I made the cheat tools, like the at-home tools, so you could sit in front of TV and do it. It didn't need to necessarily be like a commitment, because I know people's are time poor, but like you're doing it in the car, right? When you're driving somewhere, great. People are doing it on the airplane because it's the worst for feeling sinusy and, brain fog and that. And so it's more about trying to do something, like you said, clean your teeth every day. Why wouldn't you put 5 to 10 minutes aside every day to do lymphatic drainage? Whether it's the quick dry brush before you get in the shower, whether it's using the FlowVibe, whether it's doing some hand techniques, whether it's getting on a rebounder. But that can be so powerful just doing that alone. And then Flowpresso is coming in for those that really want the opportunity to really move fluids on another level.
Yeah.
So in other words, the whole body is getting an impact from that. But it's not just that, because our research also showed that we could improve sleep, stress, and anxiety by 1 session a week for 3 weeks. And it's a 40-minute session. So there's so many aspects to it. But I think lymphatic drainage is paramount now for the future of health if we want to maintain good health. But also if we want to get better, it's even more imperative. And so being able to go and have something like Flowpresso to speed up the process. So when you're doing your daily routine, you're actually able to get some momentum and get the fluids moving.
Yeah, that's a good point. I won't bore the podcast audience. We talk about the environmental toxic burden all the time. And we talk about, 40% of America is struggling with obesity. It's over 1 million people with Parkinson's, 1 million with MS, 15 million Americans with autoimmunity. We spend more per capita than any other nation in the whole world, and our chronic illness is skyrocketing. So that's the facts. And I just think if we're going to meet people where we're at, that's why we need technology. I would love to do it all through lifestyle, But if we're getting on jet planes and we're breathing rocket fuel and we're exposed to these very challenging toxicants to remove from the system, and the system is already burdened, then I think we're just meeting people where we're at. I never want to say like I'm an absolutist. And I think you can also chase outside yourself and just be just as sick. Well, what device or what technology do I need next? Because, told me I need it and it's going to solve this problem for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think just slowing down and, again, educating is the big gap in the space from my experience, mostly with medical practitioners. A lot of people that I speak with that have some self-care practice, they actually have it dialed in quite well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting. I think the one thing you've touched on a couple of times is like the stress component and the idea that, you had a large clinical trial, 135 people, you had a 92% improvement in sleep across the board, nervous system, sleep. What I thought was fascinating was the idea that the lymphatic system is all smooth muscle, so it's working when we're in parasympathetic. And,
Yes.
I think about how I let good stress override my life, which could just be me being super passionate. But if I'm in just working and like head down to the grind and like, that's not complementary to this regulatory system. So I think we can all just do a quick check-in, who's ever listening to this, and be like, well, am I in predominantly parasympathetic or am I in sympathetic overdrive? Most of the time, I think I think if there's one big driver for all of these conditions that we could tie everybody in together, it's chronic stress.
Yes, I would agree. And we're seeing it in the research. So some of the things that we did as part of our studies, we did a pilot trial to begin with before we went into the 135. And I was doing heart rate variability. Now, I did this on police, including AOS, which is like your SWAT.
Mm-hmm.
I did nurses, I did firefighters, and then I worked with chronic conditions. And I even brought in people that were or thought they were healthy. And I would say about 95% of all of those candidates, and there was a few, were living in a more fight-flight state than they were, so in a sympathetic than they were in a parasympathetic. The interesting thing about first responders is they were more stressed lying down than they were standing up because they're already ready to go. They're waiting for the next call. And it was worse in firefighters because firefighters tend to go to bed or sleep on watch when they are doing certain shifts. And so, of course, they're woken to that alarm, which is like they have to catapult out of the bed. They have to get going in a split second. So you could see why they were dealing with more chronic stress. And I'm learning a lot about the polyvagal system and trying to learn a lot more about this freeze-fawn phase and realizing I believe that more people are in that now than we've ever realized because we're just coping. We're surviving. We're living day to day. And we're waiting for the next thing to happen because the last 4 or 5 years has put a lot of people into dysregulation. And just learning alone that touch and being around people is just as imperative as regulating from how much stress do you expose yourself every day. What are you dealing with environmentally? You really need to be in that relationship or not? That sort of stuff. So one of the things we found with Flowpresso, as I said earlier, was that deep pressure. It was like you were being held and given a safe environment to remember what balance felt like. It was like it's a remembrance to me. It's like the body is just going, oh, hang on. This is what it feels like to actually feel rest and repair, not to live in fight-flight, because you need a reference point. It's like meditation. When people try to teach you meditation for the first time, you look at them going, I don't know how to find that. What are you even talking about? Because there's no reference point. And then when you find it, then you get a little more glimmer, and then you start to have this feeling of lightness and connectedness on a deeper level. You're going, oh, this is my reference point. But it can take weeks to get there in meditation. Whereas the Flowpresso somehow it's got this little miracle where it just takes you there and it holds you there and you're warm and you've got this lovely, because the way the compression works is like a wave. You like starts at your feet and it moves up your body and then it lifts your shoulders up and then you relax down again, it squeezes you and then it starts all over again. So there's this rocking momentum with being held. And I call it the deep reset. It's like in my generation, we did this Control-Alt-Delete of our computer to reset the computer, right? I think it's doing that on a really deep level so the body can remember again what balance feels like.
Yeah.
Now, if you go back to your lifestyle and make no changes, if you don't implement lifestyle changes to try and allow that to be more of your reality, it will continue. You'll go back. You'll keep falling back into that phase. But with those 3 sessions, what we found is that we started to regulate these first responders, the way they were living between parasympathetic and sympathetic. And we were getting some amazing feedback through our district commander who was responsible for overseeing it all. He was getting calls from wives going, I've got my husband back again. Or he's down on the floor playing with the children again. Like he's really interacting with them. Or I'm sleeping the best I've slept for 20 years, 8 hours for the first time in 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
There was this kind of feedback happening because the body started to remember.
Yeah. Can we talk about some of the other studies that you've done in like we've had some white papers come out in the last 6 months that are looking at other areas aside from sleep? You did and we should explain intracellular, extracellular fluid ratio to the audience. We definitely talked about it, but this idea that, 2/3 of the body's water should be in the cell and 1/3 is in the tissue. When that ratio is off, it's hard for the cell not only to let go of garbage, but to take in new beneficial nutrients. So
we worked with a technology called SOZO bioimpedance, which is used a lot in hospitals, especially for lymphedema. So you're measuring things like BRMI, intracellular, extracellular fluids. I had my extra part of my resources within this. I had a program that could actually do quadrant change. So you could measure the difference between right and left arm, right and left leg, so that you could actually see what you did. And so what we found, now it doesn't seem like much from our research if you don't know much about it, but we were changing between 2 to 3% of that cellular change. Now that's considered significant in the world of that you can actually change that much fluid, and it was being consistent because A, I wanted to prove that we moved lymphatics, but B, I knew if we could change the extracellular and push it into intracellular, that would actually allow for recovery as well. And that was quite a big game changer for me. And then what was really fascinating is when we started studying, so we've launched a new product about 3-4 weeks ago called FlowVibe 2, and that was for the lymphedema industry because they really struggle with having something for self-care. Our only solution is a pump, and that's just a singular pump on the side of the extremity.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to develop this tech. Now, what came out of studying with this technology, which I thought was absolutely fascinating, so we just studied breast cancer, post-breast cancer lymphedema or breast lymphedema, so arm or lymph or breast lymphedema. And so what we found, though, is that everyone, because I was monitoring all this quadrant change, had a 0.1 litre change in their legs, and all they were doing is from the chest up in their actual sequence of working with lymphatics.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, when you start to understand that you could just work terminus, breast tissue, arm, and you're changing 0.1 litres in your legs, that was mind-blowing for me to be able to actually have that kind of research, because you don't hear about any of this. You don't realise that maybe the work I'm doing in my chest area is actually affecting my lower area.
Yeah.
But that was profound for us to see that we had actually changed those fluids. I mean, we get the visuals. We see people say, I've lost, you call them pounds here, we call them kilos in New Zealand, and they were losing pounds around their waist. They were noticing, we were at a show on the weekend, a woman had severe edema in her ankles, and she has had a lot of health issues, and we put her in as part of a 15-minute feel-good session of Flowpresso. And she caught up with me about 4 hours later. She goes, my ankles are so much better. So the research we're now working on is to go a little bit further and just see if we can learn things like, for me, it'd be very exciting to understand inflammatory change. Like, can we change the inflammatory markers, or what happens with, over a period of maybe 6 weeks, if we can see the changes in, say, detoxifying metals, things like that, because I think this is what helps people understand why they need to do it.
Yeah, it helps. From my understanding, and we can continue to prove things out on the system, but essentially there's a robust amount of data that already exists on compression, lymphatic drainage, pneumatic pressure on the National Institute of Health in PubMed to show anything from, like you're saying, this changing of fluid volume to accelerated wound healing to non-healing diabetic ulcers. Like, what are some of the things that you're aware of that already are in existence from technologies, we could say a sister or brother technology to Flowpresso?
Well, there's that. I mean, I think just coming back first is, I think the biggest issue that we've got in the lymphology industry is we tend to still label it all for lymphedema or post-surgical, like recovery. We aren't advancing enough to show the aspects of metal toxicity, those sorts of things. And so, yes, you will see, some of the stuff that we've come across is like, especially post-surgical recovery, like postpartum, things like, any sort of abdominal surgery, if you've had, obviously breast cancer or extract surgery from a implant. There's been, where we see it amazing, is hip surgery, post-hip surgery, and knee, ACL joints, things like that. It's incredible to observe, and there's research on it. They've done quite a bit of research for performance, so performance recovery in athletes. And so a lot of it tends to be surgical or lymphedema based, like you said, post-wound and diabetic. And that's why, for me, I think the more and more we start to share the changes that we see from a holistic point of view, so I more mean, from whether it's chronic illness to the woman that can now sleep through the night for the first time in 10 years, those are the kind of things which I'm looking forward to, seeing more and more of, because now that the lymphatics finally in the limelight, we'll probably start to see more research that can actually show how much more it can be pivotal in health.
Yeah, I think that's one of my biggest pain points sometimes is when a doctor will walk up at a big medical convention and they're like, "Oh, I don't do lymph." They're like, "I treat this, that's not something, I don't work with people with lymphedema." And then from our conversations and working with so many clinics and seeing how this impacts real people with real stories, I just think it's such a blind spot. And I know that within the medical training for a doctorate, there's very, very little education on lymph. And I think it's under hours.
Yeah. I mean, I was what Stanley Roxon spoke about it at a conference. And he says at most they get 8 hours, but on average it's between 2 to 4 hours in their whole 4-year doctorate. So you can understand why it's not known. And I think part of the problem is how they can manage it. Because, surgically you've got to remove lymph nodes. There isn't a magic drug. It's, it is actually really hard from a medical point of view to actually do something with this system because it's so delicate. I had the privilege of feeling lymph nodes, and they're tiny. They're not that big, and half the time they don't even know they're actually excising them when they're doing any sort of biopsy or surgical removal. So, this is where I feel that, they're challenged by what to do with it. Even our way to test it is so archaic. There is new ideas coming through, and they're looking at different ways, and there's 3D mapping and stuff like that, but you can't count how many lymph nodes you have. We still don't even know if you can grow lymph nodes, regrow them. I watched a guy who was a surgeon, a plastic surgeon. He wanted to see if he could create breast tissue, and he was able to actually put some blood vessels into sort of a breast-shaped sort of material where he was then inserted it back into a mouse, and they were observing, and he had taken it out and he was showing us, and it looked like a shape of a breast tissue. And I'm going, oh my gosh, that would be such a great thing if we could have that. And then he opened it and there was a lymph node in there. Now, we're trained to say that, yes, you can grow surface lymphatics, but there's been no substantial research because it's actually really hard to study if you actually grow new lymph nodes or not.
Yeah.
But every other part of the body regrows. Why wouldn't we?
Yeah.
So that's the question I'm always asking and always considering. What if I get your lymph moving, your range of motion back, and better blood flow in that area. And yes, you've had 10 lymph nodes removed, but what if the body can actually recover and create more?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I see the possibility in this, again, I guess another area where it's been interesting to see it met with resistance is physical therapy. When we have some physical therapy clinics, Jennifer Schwartz in DC has a Flowpresso now at their PT clinic, and they're like, this has changed our lives. It's changed our practice forever. She's like, people are stronger. Women's periods are much less severe. Menstrual cycles are evening out. Everybody's sleeping. They're recovering. Like, they're just seeing all the metrics because they work with strength. They work with, mobility. They do work with the energetics, but they've been blown away. It's hard to have a standard model where the model is to see hundreds of patients a week for little 15 to 20 minute work sessions where we're going to just work on the mobilization of a wrist. So it's getting clinics like hers to trust and just pull out and be like, let's take another look at this. What happens if the model changes? And I understand there's that pain point for the consumer in which, some of these things are going to be cash.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be cash pay. So you do have to understand, like, what would the ROI be for my body if I chose to invest in this? But that's been a really interesting journey working with that patient population.
Yes. And I always try to explain it to PTs that what if we're preparing the body to make the shift they're trying to work with? In other words, if you've been, it's no different to you, when you go to, say, for example, a chiropractor and someone massages you beforehand, you tend to adjust better and you hold. And so the same from a lymphatics point of view, if I've reduced your inflammation, if I've been able to get those fluids mobile, I'm getting better blood flow in that area, then my mobilization I'm doing as a PT is going to be enhanced. And when I was teaching a hand-on technique with PTs around the US, their answer was always, why were we never shown this earlier?
Mm-hmm.
Why do we not understand this? This is like, certain lymph nodes in the back of the knees, like the popliteals. You release those, the knee starts to recover faster. Mm-hmm. You get into the groin and actually work with inguinal or iliac nodes, you start to see hip recovery, like from surgery, a pelvic recovery, improved periods. Like, when you understand the actual overall of what the lymphatics is doing and the mobilization of the fluids and what that will do, it's enhancing your practice. It means you don't have to work as hard. It means you're achieving outcomes on a faster timeline than what you would just doing the day-to-day that you normally do, because you can incorporate the heat or not.
Yeah.
And that's the advantage. And we become, especially in the PT industry, it was always cold, right? But now we're starting to change that. And yes, cold for that 24 to 48 hours is important from a reduction of swelling. But now they're starting to realize that after that, it's actually the heat.
Yeah.
That really is the game changer to recovery.
Yeah. I know Stacy Sims is exercise physiologist, cautious of cold, but she says across the board, she's like, my women crush it with heat.
Mm-hmm.
And she goes, heat shock proteins, activation of heat shock proteins for recovery and cellular repair is something that I just see every single athlete. It's a yes. We need to get Stacy in Flowpresso.
Yeah. Stacy, you're in New Zealand. I know. So am I. Let me know when you want to connect.
I love it. I love it. We also need the Buffalo Bills. Man, I want the Buffalo Bills to have one so bad. Yeah. I told you I was texting with their lead physical therapist, and he was like, he's like, we'll look at it next year. I'm like, it's coming. So we'll just put that out in the universe. Why FlowVibe 2? Why you had a Flow Vibrate, you had an orb. These are tools for home care, which I should mention for, before we go into that, let me just say that, like, the big question I get a lot is people are like, well, can I buy a Flowpresso? And, I'm always like, no, it's a class 2 medical device. Since we spoke on episode 183, Flowpresso has went through the FDA as a class 2 medical device, which is prescriptive. So you have to be a licensed healthcare professional to own one at your clinic or prescribe one for someone that you think is in need. Can we just talk a little bit about, like, the classification and certification and what it says we do and what does that mean for a clinic?
Certainly. So as part of our combination between heat and compression, it put us in what we call a higher terms of use. So it put us, it actually catapulted us more into being a real medical device and not an over-the-counter class 2 that you can see with other compressions. And so because combining both can be significantly powerful, and that's why, from a regulatory point of view, it became a little bit more restrictive. And so the terms of use is around post-surgical and post-trauma recovery. So it's about making sure that our practitioners are licensed to oversee that kind of care. And trauma can be anything from an injury through to, an event in your life that's occurred, through to, chronic health. I mean, that's trauma can be labeled as many things. So it did mean that we were now in a position where our practitioners needed to be licensed to prescribe or to deliver medical devices. So it can be anything from a naturopathic doctor to an esthetician, for example. And it did create a little bit of, unfortunately, a ripple because it did limit us. But what it has done is it's put us in a league that is very different to what maybe our competitor would have been, because now we're being recognized to be used in more clinical aspects rather than just an at-home. And one of the things I did see is that, for example, an at-home product, not everyone understands the power of draining lymph. So, for example, every day for 5 days will throw you into a significant detox. You will feel awful. All sorts of symptoms will come up. You'll think your world's ending because you've literally opened up the pathways and everything's draining all at once. Combination of heat and compression, for women, that can bring on a sense of anxiety if you don't know how to regulate that because, hot flushes, or you call them hot flashes, it's understanding that. The fact that we wrap and hold you can bring up trauma. It can literally bring up cellular trauma. And you're like, hang on, what's going on? I had a police officer in the middle of a conference at a health and wellness safety group, and she had been in the field for a long time, and she had, in the middle of this conference, a reoccurrence of a PTSD moment. And she you saw her starting to react, and I came over and just held her hand, and then she just breathed through it and she released. And she said it was one of the most powerful impacts of her life. She could see it all coming. She realized she didn't have to do anything. She was safe because she could feel the suit holding her. And then all of a sudden it dispersed. But had she gone into the fear, it could have been a different situation.
Yeah. It's powerful. Yeah. And it's also an experience that you're not going to self-facilitate. Like, you're going to have someone button you in, set your temperature, set your pressures, make adjustments, put an eye mask on, give you headphones. The magic, and it's great to do alone, but the magic is to be held and served and have someone holding space. And that's a 5-minute exercise by someone else. But truly the design of the suit, in my experience, that's where the magic is.
Yeah. And, you want, coming to your point, yes, that the magic of having someone to put you in, but someone that's actually overseeing your care.
Yeah.
So your recovery so you're not dealing with Herx responses. You are having coming out of that suit, for example, feeling like you've been hugged all over, in a state of bliss, feeling light, not having 3 days of massive detox afterwards, like being carefully supported through that healing process. And so, what it has pushed me is to realize I need to now do a very high level over-the-counter product. And now with lymphatics getting into the limelight, I think this is where we'll be able to deliver something like that. Whereas in the past, no one really understood it needed to be certain pressures. It needed to be done a certain way. I'll just buy the cheapest virgin and I'm okay. Now we'll be able to lean into all those other people that want one at home and all the rest. And that tech won't be as advanced, but it'll still deliver the same experience.
Yeah.
And it can be moderated in alignment with practitioners that may not have, or people at home that may not have that expertise.
Yeah. I think there's such a powerful piece of community, and we don't, in my experience, we don't heal alone. Like, loneliness is a generator of disease. And I think that's a part of the real pandemic right now is just we're all so separate, even though we're hyper connected. And that's part of the joy for me is putting somebody in a suit and being like, wow, look what I did for this person today. Cause they get out and it's, I've said this on other podcasts. There's like, of all the tech I have some great stuff in the house. There's nothing in its somatic like deliverance and like felt experience and 40-minute transformation like Flowpresso, like hands down. And that's why I continue to like stand by it and rave about it and work with the team and why I choose to be part of the Flowpresso family because it is so, so, so powerful. So I want to celebrate you for that invention again. Just quickly, why FlowVibe 2? Because we said we've got these home care tools that are like, again, for me, it's like brushing your teeth between dental appointments. Like you go to the dentist, you go do Flowpressos, but your home care, I choose to use vibration for that. So why did we do a FlowVibe 2?
As I said earlier, it was actually a drive. I still speak every other month in New Zealand on lymphedema to help women know how they can manage this condition. And it's been so obvious for so long that there's so little available for at home. And so the big drive behind it was actually, and all our messaging is for lymphedema.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say it can't be used by others. So what I did is I took the 3 vibrations that are sitting in FlowVibrate. I then added one of the oscillations that's in the Flow Orb. And then I brought in 35 hertz, which is a frequency known for microcirculation. So the idea was that not only could they open their drainage pathways, but they could work on dense tissue. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, it would be like even women with cellulite might like to use it, or people with, abdominal issues where they need to get that density and go into different layers. That's the advantage to it. So it was really like a one-stop shop. I mean, in our research, we had one woman that completely stopped using her pump. She said, for the first time in my life, I'm not stuck to this thing 1 hour a day. I can just do this in front of the TV. It's amazing. So, for me, it's about lifestyle. It's about quality of life. And this was an option to make it available to those women and men, because men get breast cancer too out there, that they had a choice that they could do something a lot easier on themselves than being hooked up and having to go for intense therapy. They could actually do something every day as well.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we're probably at our hour. Someone could have just knocked on the studio, so we're going to close it down. I'm going to give you one last question because since we last had our episode 183, the world's changed a lot. So you can wave a magic wand. You can turn in all the iPhones to channel Desiree. What would you say to the people of the planet right now?
Feel. We need to come back to feeling where we're at in life, as in find your barometer. Where are you? Get awareness. Am I in that fight flight? Or am I in that freeze fawn? Am I regulated? And then what can I do to change something in my life every day? And that can be just that you go out walking or you go out and put your feet on the ground. Mm-hmm. Start with the ones that you can do and then consider things like lymphatic drainage and breathing more efficiently, because breathing alone helps lymphatics. So that's what I want to bring people back to basics. We've got so overwhelmed with internet. There's so many things to do. There's so many products to take. There's so many people to listen to that we're completely forgetting our own ability to regulate and feel where we're at. That's right now what I think is so valuable, because once you see where you're at, that's when you can make the change.
Beautiful. All right, team. We'll be back. Desiree, thank you for being a guest on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Big love.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. All the best for health.
Bye, team.
All right, team, let's be real. When your immune system goes down, everything in life feels harder. That's why I use Silver Biotics, and I keep it in my cabinet and my travel bag. It's not hype, it's nano silver technology, backed by science and proven to support immune function. Most importantly, hear this, without wrecking your gut like antibiotics. This is fast-acting, broad-spectrum immune support you can take every day. And you can trust it when life hits you hard. I've used this in travel, under extreme stress, even post-surgery, and it's always come through.
There's no resistance buildup, and there's no nonsense. It's just clean, simple support when you need it most. So you can use code BeautifullyBroken for a generous discount in the cart at silverbiotics.com, because nothing feels better than knowing your body is ready. Let's go. Ladies and gentlemen, here we are with season 9 of the podcast. We're about to crest into year 6. Can you believe it? I'm so glad you're still here. And I just wanted to remind you, if you liked the show, please head over to Apple or Spotify and give us a 5-star review. It really expands the listenership. Now, there's one big way you can continue to learn and deepen the relationship that we started in this very episode. You can go to beautifullyBroken.world and you can check out our brand new website and store. Listed are all the technologies, the supplements, the self-quantification, the products, everything that I love, I personally use, and I've curated for this audience. Most of the items have a significant discount just by using the link or our code, Beautifully Broken, all one word, and they do support the podcast through affiliations. Now, if you want to see the faces of our guests and you want to watch me unbox products and see reviews, you can go over to YouTube at Beautifully Broken World. Now, this next message is from my vast team of internet lawyers. The information on this podcast is for education. By listening, you agree not to use the information found here as medical advice to treat, diagnose, or cure any medical condition in yourself or others. Always consult your guiding physician for actual medical issues you may be having. Now, in my closing, we are truly in a paradigm shift. We need you at your very best. So use these conversations as a jumping off point for further exploration. Always listen to your own body. And remember, while life may be painful, how we put the pieces back together is a beautiful, beautiful process. I love you so much. I'm your host, Freddie Kimmel.